on the 7 seals of Revelation. And I want to begin by saying that if you think that things are bad enough on planet Earth, and they really absolutely are, we're living in a messed up world. And I don't know if all parents have thought this way over the generations, but I do fear for, in some respect, and I use that word fear cautiously, for our very younger generation in terms of what they will see in the coming years. Because, as I say, we think things are bad enough, they're going to get a whole lot worse. Everything that's happening today is certainly pointing to the end of time, and the end of time as we know it. Time relates to earth. Time does not relate to heaven. It relates to earth. And so as we know time, what we're seeing happening across our world, and I believe has been increased since the beginning of the 20th century. And if we thought that that was a bad enough century, then the century that we're living in is certainly, the indications are that it's going to be much, much worse. I believe that the next major prophetic fulfillment is, in fact, the rapture of the church. It's not the return of Jesus to the planet. It's the rapture of the church. Because, first and foremost, the church will be caught up to meet the Lord in the air. That's where we're going to meet him. We're not going to meet him on the Mount of Olives. We're not going to meet him in Jerusalem. We're going to meet the Lord in the air. And so the next major prophetic fulfillment is the rapture of the church, when every believer will be caught up to meet the Lord together in the air. And then beyond that moment, the world will enter what we believe will be a period of global tribulation, where every nation will be caught up, and there will not be a hiding place on this planet, where we'll be caught up in global tribulation, and that tribulation will be headed up by the Antichrist himself. But it will also be a time of God's wrath being poured out upon a world that has completely and totally rejected him. I look back over my life as a Christian, and I look back at certain decades in which it seemed that things could not get any worse than what they were then. And yet what we're seeing today is getting increasingly worse. You can't even watch an advert now at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, but you're smacked up the face with something. Talk about 9 o'clock watershed. As long as somebody's paying a few £1,000 for an advert, then they'll show absolutely anything. And it's like almost everything and anything has been accepted these days. And so we're living in a world that has completely and totally rejected him. And when it comes to beyond the rapture of the church, that will be God dealing with the planet, dealing with humanity that has once and for all finally made its choice to reject him. This outpouring of God's wrath begins with the opening of the 7 seals. And we need to understand that the opening of the 7 seals is still future. It's still future. This will happen after the church age. A lot of people get worried and concerned about the 7 seals and about the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse and about the Antichrist and so on. These things, as you see tonight, as far as we're concerned, will happen after the church age. The opening of the 7 seals is the beginning of God's judgment upon the earth, upon humanity. The church is not condemned and will not be condemned by God and will not face judgment by God. There is no condemnation to those of us who are in Christ Jesus. We will not face judgment. Noah found grace, found favor in the eyes of the Lord. And before the flood came, we know that Noah was taken out of that situation. Lot was a preacher of righteousness according to Jude. And before Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed, God took Lot and his family out of that particular situation. And so God will take the church out of this situation before these seals are open. So we're still living, of course, in the church age. An age that began 2,000 years ago. And I do kind of follow the periods of time that add up to several 2,000 years. Old Testament, 2,000 years from Adam to Abraham, to the end of the Old Testament, 2,000 years up to Christ and so on, and then with 2,000 years from the beginning of the church until now. But this church age will end, and will only end with the rapture of the church. And it's only then that the Antichrist will be revealed. It's only then he will be revealed. So anyone who tells you they know who the Antichrist is, they have no idea. I love what Paul says in Thessalonians, where he talks about the man of sin being revealed. And the word that he uses, revealed, is exactly the same word that's used of Christ when he will be revealed with his angels from heaven. Some people wonder, when Jesus returns again to this earth, will the nations turn against him? Will people turn against him the way they did at first? And the simple answer to that is no, because when he came first time around, he came as a babe born in Bethlehem of Judea. And he came for the purpose of living life as a man among men, and then finally dying on a cross and rising again from the dead, returning to heaven and coming back again. And we believe that's 2,000 years later. And we believe that he will be back soon. But that when he does return, he's not coming back as a baby, but he's coming back as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And there will be no mistaking him. And there will be no rejection of him when he sets up his kingdom on this earth. There will be those who will submit and surrender to him. And Jesus Christ, it will be absolutely clear that he is indeed the Son of God. The devil will never acknowledge his position. He will always seek to destroy anything that Jesus does. But the bottom line is that then when he returns, he will be known, he will be revealed with his angels from heaven. And the same word revealed is used of the Antichrist. So that when he is revealed, we will know, the world will know, those that are here at that particular time, they will know exactly who he is. That's the one that they talked about. He will be revealed. This all takes place after the church age. Jonathan talked about Revelation 2, 3, the church age. Revelation 4 and 5, where the church, the Old Testament saints, New Testament saints, were in the throne room of heaven, and John was able to experience that at that moment, was able to write about it. And so chapter 6 reveals what will take place on earth after the church is caught up to meet the Lord in the air. Revelation 5, Jesus takes the scroll. We've already heard that God, who sat on the throne, that he held a scroll that was sealed with 7 seals, and that no one, it was said, was found worthy to take the scroll. Then the Lamb stepped up and took the scroll out of the hand of him who sat on the throne, and he began to loose the scrolls. So the opening of the first 4 seals reveals the loosing of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And I want to share a bit about these 4 horsemen, and then we'll finish off by just looking at the last 3 seals briefly at the end. The literal meaning of apocalypse, it literally means revelation or unveiling. To reveal something, to unveil something that has been hidden. That's what the word apocalypse means. But because it's connected to the 4 horsemen in Revelation chapter 6, and because of all the stuff that happens whenever these seals are open, that follows in the wake of these 4 horsemen, then the word apocalypse is often used to describe global catastrophe. But in simple terms, it just simply means revelation. And there will be an unveiling and a revelation of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And without trying to get into too much detail on it, these 4 horsemen represent one person in different forms as he moves throughout his reign of horror and terror on the earth. And that is, in fact, the Antichrist himself. Some people say that the horsemen, and in fact, let's look at the first one. If we can open up Revelation 6 and verses 1 and 2, and we'll talk first of all about this first horseman. John says, I watched as the Lamb opened the first of the 7 seals. Then I heard one of the 4 living creatures say in a voice like thunder, come. I looked, and there before me was a white horse. Its rider held a bow, and he was given a crown, and he rode out as a conqueror bent on conquest. And there's some people who, for some reason, would suggest that this particular horseman, first and foremost, is Jesus Christ. And they say that he's Jesus because he's wearing a crown and because he's wearing a white horse. But what we see happens in the wake of this particular horseman, and when you link him up with the other horsemen, what we see is the release of war and famine and death. And I want you to know that when Jesus Christ returns to this earth, he's not bringing war and famine and death. He's going to establish his kingdom of peace upon this earth. And we're not going to get into it, but there will be a period of 1,000 years, the millennium, when the church will reign with Christ on this earth. And that will not be a time of war and famine and death. And so, as far as I'm concerned, this rider on the white horse cannot be Christ, because this does not follow Jesus whenever he returns again to this earth. As far as I'm concerned, the world is presently being prepared for its final days, when a man will arise and become the dominant force, the dominant world leader on planet Earth. Someone bent on conquest. I believe that those last three words are so important. He will be bent on conquest. This is not Jesus Christ coming back with his angels in order to set up and establish his kingdom of peace on this earth for 1,000 years. This is someone who is hell-bent on conquest, on submitting and subduing people and bringing destruction in his wake. The fact is, the world is already looking for such a person who will become the dominant world leader, who will lead the world out of all its mess and all its issues, whether it's political issues or financial issues, and looking to one who hopefully will bring peace and stability. For 2,000 years, the Bible has spoken of this man, and it represents him as none other than the Antichrist himself, the man of sin. He's represented by the rider on the white horse, who offers peace, but it's false peace. Instead of bringing peace, he will bring war, death, and destruction. Daniel spoke of this particular world leader some 2,600 years ago, 600 to 700 years before John wrote Revelation. And he spoke of him as the prince who shall come. This particular person will be the devil's masterpiece. He will arise to become the final world dictator. This world has known dictatorships for millennia, whether it was through the Egyptians, the Assyrians, the Romans, whoever else. And there will finally be one more world dictator who will arise. At first he will appear to be peaceful, but he will go on then to seek to devour anyone who stands in his way. Many will fail to take heed of the warnings. Even today, the church have been preaching this stuff for many, many years, and there are still those today who laugh and scoff at this idea. And that's how it was even in the days of Noah. Noah preached, and I don't know how long, but we know it was 120 years before that the ark was finally completed. Whether they worked for 120 years, but certainly from Noah was told until the ark was completed. People laughed and people scoffed. No matter how long it took, finally came the day whenever the rains came, floods came. Noah was taken out of that situation, but the earth at that time was destroyed by floods. And surely as the floods came, just as sure as the floods came at that particular time, so too will the rider on the white horse, who will be bent on conquest. Let's look at the opening of the second seal, because when the second seal is opened, then the second rider is revealed, and he's the rider on the red horse. Verse 3, when the Lamb opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature say, "Come." Then another horse came out, a fiery red one. Its rider was given power to take peace from the earth and to make people kill each other. To him was given a large sword. I want you to notice that he was given power to take peace from the earth. Like many who have stood on the platform over the years for decades, they've stood on the promised peace, but then later they imposed war and bloodshed. So too will the Antichrist. As the rider on the white horse, he will promise peace. And there will be those who will believe what he has to say, and they'll submit to his leadership and his authority. But as the rider on the red horse, he will deliver bloodshed instead of peace. Even today we hear talk of peace, promises of peace, and yet more money's been spent today on weapons of warfare than at any other single time in human history. Just recently, a week or two ago, a couple of weeks ago, I heard it reported in one of the news, in fact on probably all news channels, that Russia now has missiles, attack missiles, that can travel 20 times the speed of sound. The only plane could ever go beyond the speed of sound, unless there are military planes. I'm sure there are military planes can do it. But it was Concorde in terms of public planes. But you imagine something going 20 times the speed of Concorde? This is an attack missile. Attack missiles. Why does Russia need? I mean, they talk peace. They talk about alliances with other nations. Why would they want this kind of weaponry? Imagine Usain Bolt, the speed that man runs, somebody running 20 times faster than him. Incredible. Imagine someone driving 20 times faster than Lewis Hamilton. I was just about to say, Tom, you beat me to it. These things are beyond our imagination. But now Russia has the type of weaponry that, and I don't know how far it can go. I don't know if it can reach Belfast if Putin's even interested in Belfast. But 20 times the speed of sound is incredible. And then just a few days ago, 10 o'clock at night, I think it all happened at 10 o'clock at night. News channels were open. They're ready to go through whatever it was they prepared for their news. Then almost every one of them went live to the President of America, Prime Minister of United Kingdom, and the Prime Minister of Australia, as they jointly released information that had formed a new alliance called AUKUS just a few days ago. UK-US, A for Australia, UK for United Kingdom, US for United States of America. And already it's causing major fallouts even across Europe. France has lost over 40 billion in terms of, I think it's planes that they'd ordered, or submarines, and that's now been cancelled on them. And there's all sorts of issues going on, and China is concerned about this new alliance that all of a sudden has hit planet Earth just within the past few days. They talk about peace. The Apostle Paul said that when they talk about peace and quiet, he says then sudden destruction will come. And we're living on a planet today when there's a whole lot of talk about peace. And yet, as even some of the local murals state, they're preparing for war. And friends, there's coming a day when the world will be duped into accepting a false peace. But then that false peace will be followed by an outbreak of violence and death imposed upon it by the man of sin, who's the rider on the red horse. So the Antichrist will promise peace, but that will be short-lived, followed by bloodshed. The opening of the third seal is in verse 5, and it's the black horse. When the Lamb opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, "Come." I looked up, and there before me was a black horse. Its rider was holding a pair of scales in his hand, And then I heard what sounded like a voice among the 4 living creatures saying, 2 pounds of wheat for a day's wages, and 6 pounds of barley for a day's wages. And do not damage the oil in the wine. You've seen the recent pictures come out of Afghanistan. People selling their fridges. People selling stuff they've lived for, they've bought. Anything they can take out of their homes, they're bringing them on the streets and they're selling just so they could buy a loaf of bread. Feed themselves and feed their kids. It's happening right now. And here John is saying something that will happen beyond the church age, that will bring about a situation where 2 pounds of wheat will cost a day's wage, and 2 pounds of barley a day's wage. And so the white horse promises peace, but it's false peace. The red horse brings bloodshed and violence and war in its wake. And then immediately after the rider of the red horse comes the rider of the black horse, and that brings in famine. And so John is showing that false peace leads to war and bloodshed, which in turn leads to famine. False peace will always lead to conflict. False peace will always lead to war. False peace will always lead to bloodshed. And then beyond that conflict situation, there is famine. And we're talking here about a worldwide famine, the like of which the world has not yet seen. And that will be based on a worldwide shortage of food. There's a whole lot of scaremongering goes on, and it has done, even going from 1999 into the year 2000, a whole lot of scaremongering. I was taken into secret rooms in churches in America that was literally stockpiled with food that could last for 10 to 20 years to look after their own people. Because a lot of people thought back then, the year 2000, Y2K they called it, that the world was coming to an end and so on. A whole lot of scaremongering going on. But what we do know is that we're heading towards something. And no matter what we do in order to prepare for it, in terms of having these secret rooms behind bookshelves and so on, bottom line is we won't be here for it. So we don't need to really worry about it and be that concerned about it. But there will be a worldwide shortage of food on the wake of this third horseman being revealed. We kind of get there at times, or people get concerned that whenever the first lockdown came, remember, you couldn't have got a toilet roll anywhere. People were panicking over all sorts. Shelves in Tesco's and all sorts of places were all completely empty. People panicking. But there's a preparation taking place, and of that we know that's something that we at least understand. But then to make matters worse, not only will there be a worldwide shortage of food, but to make matters worse, a mark will be introduced. And without that particular mark, no one will be able to buy or sell. When is this mark introduced? It's introduced beyond the rapture of the church. It's introduced with the revelation of the Antichrist and beyond his period of promising peace, his false peace. But we're told in Revelation 13, it's on the screen, Revelation 13, verses 16 and 17, that all people will be forced to receive a mark on their right hands or on their foreheads, so that they could not buy or sell unless they had the mark, which is the name of the beast, or the number of its name. And that number is 666. It's interesting, Jonathan did say about the number 7 being the number for completion. Numbers mean something in the Bible. And number 3 is the number for divine perfection. Number 7 is the number for spiritual perfection or spiritual completion. Number 6 is the number of man. Man was created on the 6th day. Number 4 is the number for the earth. And when you do the numerical value of what they believe is the oldest city on the planet, that city is Damascus. And the numeric value of Damascus is 444. Is that just a coincidence? Number for grace is the number 5. Number for man is 6. Number for the Antichrist is 666, setting himself up as an opponent of God. That will be his number, 666. And there will come a day whenever those who will still be on this earth will be forced to take this particular mark, and we'll mention this again in a moment. Let's move on to Revelation 6 and verses 7 and 8 with the opening of the 4th seal. We'll look at the 4th rider. Verse 7, when the Lamb opened the 4th seal, I heard the voice of the 4th living creature say, come. I looked, and there before me was a pale horse. Its rider was named Death, and Hades was following close behind. They were given power over 1/4 of the earth to kill by sword, by famine and plague, and by the wild beasts of the earth. And so the rider on the pale horse, he's called Death. And he's followed closely by Hades, or by hell. And I want you to note that during the time of the pale horse, that 1/3 of the earth's population will die. Today's figures, that will be around 2 billion people. That's the number will die at that particular time. I think it's right in saying that prior to the 20th century that there had not been a single war on this earth where 1 million people had died. Thousands died in conflicts, but never 1 million. And it was only when we hit the 20th century and you hit World War I, and I can't remember the exact number that died, certainly over 10 million died in World War I. I think the figures come to mind as 18 million, but I might be wrong there. 27 million. Thanks, Johnny. You come up and preach here, can you? But it's amazing that prior to that there had not been a conflict where 1 million people had died. But everything changed when we came into the 20th century. And then World War II came. And it's believed that Hitler killed 30 million in 30 days. 30 million in 30 days. And so it's like things are getting progressively worse, but it's increasing at such an exponential rate that it does get scary at times when you think of what could happen to this planet. Daniel speaks of this as a time of trouble unlike anything that's ever been seen in human history. So he speaks as the prince that's coming. He speaks of this time of trouble that's coming upon the planet. Jeremiah declared that that particular day would be great and that there would be none like it. When Old Testament prophets talk about the day of the Lord, or that particular day, they're referring to a day of judgment that God has set aside for this earth. That's what they're referring to. And Jeremiah is declaring that that day will be great. None will be like it. Jesus himself said that except those days be shortened, no flesh will be left. Things will be so out of hand that no one would be left alive on this planet if he did not himself return with his church to the earth. And all this shows that we're heading to a time of trouble, the like of which we've never yet seen, or the world has not yet seen. But that will be a time faced only by those who have and are rejecting Jesus Christ. Those who accept him, those who have accepted him. Paul says that the dead in Christ shall rise first, and those of us who remain on the earth shall be caught up together with them to meet the Lord in the air. He's talking there about the rapture, about Jesus returning, us being caught up to meet the Lord in the air. And then for that 7-year period, Revelation 4 and 5, the throne room, all that stuff. And while 4 and 5 is taking place, then the seals are open from chapter 6 onwards. And so for those of us that are saved, we will not face this. But it's good that we are aware of it. We know that what's going on the planet today is leading to these events, that we can not only talk about it among ourselves, but also share it with others. And so the name given to this 4th rider is Death, because his actions will result in the deaths of a quarter of the earth's population at that time, followed closely by Hades, followed closely by hell, because death will take the body and hell will take the soul. What a tragedy for those that face that at that particular time. And so to recap before moving on to finish with the last three seals, when the first seal is open, the Antichrist appears as the last world ruler who will promise peace, but it will be a false peace. That peace will be short-lived and will be followed by a period of bloodshed across the earth, resulting in famine because of global food shortage, followed then by the deaths of millions and the loss of millions in hell forever. And that's not even counting those that have died so far. I think, Johnny, you can keep me writing this one here because it's another figure, mate. But I think that the number of people on planet Earth today, if you go beyond all of our births, that we would almost equal the number of the entire human race that's been on the planet from Adam. So there's a whole lot of people alive today. And yet all those who have rejected Jesus Christ are already in their eternal destination and ready for that to be sealed. But I'm glad to be saved today. I'm telling you, see, when you look at all this stuff, it's just good to know that we're saved and good to know that we're ready for anything the devil has to throw at us. And so the opening of the first four seals sees the release of the four horsemen of the apocalypse. When the fifth seal is open, John sees those who are slain for the word of God and for the testimony of Jesus. Let's read it from verse 9. When he opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain because of the word of God and the testimony they had maintained. They called out in a loud voice, "How long, sovereign Lord, holy and true, until you judge the inhabitants of the earth and avenge our blood?" Then each of them was given a white robe, and they were told to wait a little longer until the full number of their fellow servants, their brothers and sisters, were killed just as they had been. I want you to note, this is not the church. This is a different group of believers. These are those who are martyred during the reign of the Antichrist. The reign that commences after the rapture of the church. We're gone. So these are martyred on the earth for their faith in Christ beyond the rapture of the church. See, although the church is gone from the earth, God will not leave himself without a witness. He will raise up 144,000 from the tribes of Israel to be his witnesses during that period of time. They will recognize who the Messiah is. 12,000 from each tribe, they're listed, will commit themselves to following Christ and will become international evangelists. They will take the word of Christ during those years as much as they possibly can to whoever they can, whoever will listen. 144,000 witnesses. In Revelation chapter 11, we read of the two witnesses, Enoch and Elijah, who have not yet died, and they will return to this earth, and they will face death, but they will be witnesses, and you read about that in Revelation chapter 11. In chapter 14, we read of three angelic witnesses, three angels that are sent by God, and they will declare the gospel to those who will listen to them at that time. So God will not leave himself without a witness. And it's believed that this will be the greatest evangelism period in history, even beyond the church. Some people think they're doing well. I'm not too sure how well the church is doing these days. I'm absolutely not too sure. I think we're making a mess of things at so many different levels. And maybe that's why that the Lord's going to remove the church so he can raise up these other witnesses, and let's get the job done. Let's get it finished. And so there will be those who will during that tribulation period, they will turn and put their faith and trust in Jesus Christ. Some say it's not fair that they get a second chance. But I often ask the question, how many here only ever got one chance? We've all got a second, a third, and a fourth, and a fifth, and a sixth chance. This is not something that's going to be offered to people that will favor them more than anyone else. These are those who are left on the earth after the rapture, who have been forced to submit to the Antichrist, who have been forced to take the mark of the beast. 666. And it's during that 7-year period that most of them who decide to follow Jesus will pay the ultimate price with their lives. They will be martyred. So it's all very well for some people saying, today, well, it's not fair that they're going to get a second chance. It's not that they're getting a second chance. God's day of grace will not end until the final white judgment seat of Christ. And even during this tribulation period, there will be those who will turn to Christ. But they will face the Antichrist and they will face death. Someone want to ask? Yes.
So, see the mark of the beast. If they take the mark, will they not be able to see it?
That will be the choice, that you either take the mark of the beast or you accept Christ and you follow him. That'll be the choice. Yeah. So, it will be like Daniel when he was told that he wasn't to pray to his God. He had a choice. He could have refused to pray to God and could have bowed down to the image that he was being called on to bow down to. But he made a choice that he wasn't going to do that. If he had bowed down to that image, then he was submitting himself to that rather than to God, and could not therefore have called himself a true prophet of God. And so anyone who purposely receives the mark of the beast, I certainly don't think can ever call themselves Christians. I believe they will, because I believe that because of all that they've heard so far. I mean, listen, if the rapture was to take place tonight and people we know are left behind, they will miss us. Not only will they miss us, they will miss the church. And then they will be thinking of all the stuff that was said, and they'll remember. And because all that stuff will come back to their memories, they will then know the truth like they've never known it before. But the rapture's taking place. They're not going to be part of that. They're left behind. So they're the ones that are going to be forced to make the choice. And they will know that they're living in a situation now where they either choose what they had been taught and what others will be continue to teach, will be raised up to teach, or that they take the mark of the beast. And yes, I believe that they will know. And so those left behind, they will be forced to submit the Antichrist and be forced to take the mark of the beast. Revelation chapter 7 and verse 13, John asked the question, he says, who are these dressed in white? Now, John was an apostle in the church. You'd have thought if this is the church, they'd have known. But he's asking the question, who are they? And then the answer comes, these are those who come out of the great tribulation. So that many of those who are left behind will know the truth that they had been taught, will know that they now face the stuff that they'd been told about, that you had told them about, that we had told them about. And they now have to make a choice. And these are the two choices. You submit to Christ or you submit to the Antichrist. And the evidence you submit to the Antichrist is you take the mark of the beast. The evidence that you don't submit to the Antichrist is you don't take the mark of the beast. That's the evidence. And so those who refuse, they will die a martyr's death if they refuse to take the mark of the beast. The sixth seal is open in verse 12. We're going to get there in a few minutes. So verse 12, this is the beginning of God's, when it comes to the four horsemen of the apocalypse, we see then it's like the Antichrist almost having his way. And I was just thinking there before it came up earlier on that in some way, it's a bit like the devil and Job. It's like God saying, you want to have a go? Have a go. My servant will still be faithful to me. And the Antichrist will have a go, and he will do his worst. But then when it comes to the opening of the fifth seal, and particularly the sixth seal, this is more like God now stepping in and saying, your time's coming to an end. I'm beginning to do what needs to get done here. And so we're told in verse 12 that there will be great earthquakes. The sun will be darkened. The moon will turn to blood. Stars will fall to the earth. Sky will be rolled back. Mountains will be moved. And that the rulers of the world, kings and so on, that they will hide themselves in the rocks and the mountains. They even call upon the rocks and mountains to fall on them and to hide them from the face of him who sits upon the throne. That will be the fear that will come upon humanity whenever the sixth seal is opened. This is now God moving against the nations and against those who have rejected him. The last seal is the seventh seal. And that's not open in chapter 6. That's opened in chapter 8 and verse 1. And it's like before showing what happens or what's revealed beyond the opening of the seventh seal, it's like John's pausing. And chapter 7 becomes like a pause between the end of chapter 6 and the start of chapter 8. And in chapter 7, John is reflecting on those who have been raised up to be witnesses, the 144,000, but also reflecting on those who have been faithful to Christ during the tribulation period and have become martyrs. At the end of the opening of chapter 6, in verse 17, we're told the great day of wrath has come. Who can withstand it? So chapter 6 ends with the question, who can withstand this great day of wrath? He's not now talking about the anger of the Antichrist. He's talking about the judgment of God being poured out upon the earth. He said it's now time for this to happen. God's now going to move. Who can withstand it? And the question is not so much who can stand before men or who can stand before the Antichrist. But the question is who can stand before the Lamb of God? Who can stand before the one who was worthy to take the scroll and loose the seals of that scroll? Who's worthy to stand before him, and who's worthy to stand before and to withstand the judgments of God? Who is able to stand and withstand the wrath of God? While kings and the great men of the earth are running to the rocks and the mountains and calling on them to fall on them, chapter 7 shows who will stand. It's like John's taking time out before he goes to the final seal. He's taking time out to answer that question. And so he takes us through chapter 7 and shows us the 144,000 of all the tribes of Israel and a great multitude that is dressed in white robes. But then, when the seventh seal is open, we're told that there's silence in heaven for 30 minutes. Silence in heaven for 30 minutes. Some think the reason for that is because the men are allowed in first and the women are only going to get in half an hour later. But why is there silence in heaven for those 30 minutes? And yet we know that, and I said at the very start, that time does not relate to heaven. It relates only to earth. But 30 minutes of earth time passes and there's silence in heaven. And those 30 minutes probably seem like a long, long time. Why the silence for the half an hour? Because the opening of the seventh seal leads to the sounding of the seven trumpets and the outpouring of the bowls of judgment upon the earth. So even before that, this earth's still going to go through some stuff. And it's like heaven is holding its breath. It knows that we're not the end. This is the end game. Everything's going to be finalized very soon. And so when that seventh seal is open, before the trumpets and the bowls, there's silence, because this is it. And then from chapter 8 right on through, I think it's to chapter 19, you just read of those outpourings of God's judgment upon the earth until Christ returns in chapter 19. The church isn't even mentioned until chapter 19, because the church isn't there and the church isn't here. And there's something in me that says that for those 30 minutes, it's not that God's reluctant to move in judgment, because God has already appointed a day in which he will judge the earth. And he will move when he knows it's time to move and to do what he needs to do. But it's also like those moments of silence is not talking about reluctance, but is showing again the grace and the mercy of God. You see, we're told that God is gracious and slow to anger. God is not quick to judge. God is not quick to pour out his wrath upon humanity or upon individuals. God is a God of love and mercy and grace. I believe that's why that we've had these 2,000 years from Christ until now. We're talking about the age and the day of grace. We still live in the day of grace when people can freely submit their lives to Jesus Christ, and in most places on this planet without the fear of death. Maybe just having to go into work and tell somebody got saved last night. And we still have an opportunity. Our families, our loved ones, our communities have an opportunity to come to faith in Jesus Christ. We're still living in the day of grace. God is slow to anger, and he abounds in steadfast love. And those 30 minutes of silence is showing that God is not anxious to come and to bring judgment, but bring judgment he will. Because bringing judgment he must. Otherwise, justice will never be seen to be done. Eternal, divine justice will never be seen to be done. And so this is what will happen beyond the rapture of the church. We have a responsibility to be the church until that day takes place, and that we live for Christ every day as best we can in order to reach as many as we can, so that they don't have to go through this situation.